we find pretty obvious, and sometimes the best investments are hiding right in front of us.
OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, teased us with AI-generated video recently. And honestly, the videos were amazing. Clearly, the AI revolution is here, and it is the hottest topic and all anyone wants to talk about. We're no different. And so we've invited Aylon Ben-Shlomo today, who is a managing director at Aristotle Capital, who have been managing the Steadyhand Global Equity Fund since fall 2021. Aylon, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Salman, and everyone at Steadyhand. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I've heard you do the explanation really well, but for our audience, give us the layperson's explanation of artificial intelligence and how it's impacting things around us.
Sure. So artificial intelligence is a term that's been around since 1955, in fact. It was coined by a Stanford professor. And I bring that up to say that it's not something new. What is perhaps new is the proliferation in our lives and the rapid advancements that have gone on. Clearly, to your point, AI is real and it's here. The demand is there. So what is a layperson's way of thinking about AI? One way to think of it is imagine the tools that are needed for a computer to do things that we would expect of a human. That's one. Another is imagine a data set so robust that it would overwhelm the human brain. Those are things that artificial intelligence are doing. So if we take a step back and think to the times when we were in primary school or elementary school here in the US, and multiplication tables. This example we find is one that correlates well or resonates well with the audience. So multiplication tables, when we were learning them in school, we had to learn, what is 3 times 2? What is 3 times 3? And maybe if a teacher threw us a curveball and said, what's 5 times 2? We'd have to look at the table and see that is in fact 10. But over time, we'd train our brains, our machine would learn, and we would come up with the intelligence and the know-how that when someone said, what's 4 times 3? We knew right away it was 12. And if we take those kind of calculations and those kind of concepts to larger and larger data sets and more complex computations, like turning text into video, that is AI. That is artificial intelligence today. And so hopefully that's a decent framework to help start the conversation.
That resonates with me definitely because my daughter's learning the times tables these days. So I'm experiencing that real time. So you mentioned that it's been, the term has been around for a long time. It has become mainstream now, right? It's something that everyone is talking about. So maybe take us through what the real world implications of this technology are for viewers at home and others that might not have yet interacted with it or touched it, but may actually be dealing with it without themselves knowing.
Yeah, why should we care? What is the impact on our lives of AI? And it is akin to things like the mobile phone and the internet. Things that are coming from AI and generative AI. And I should have mentioned that the difference between AI and generative AI is just what you would think. In ChatGPT, we prompt it and it generates a response. In other aspects that we might talk about, other applications of AI, you might prompt it with something else and ask it to generate something else. So what are 3 real world examples? I would venture to bet that the overwhelming majority of viewers and listeners have interacted with AI before. And there are simple things that maybe we have had mixed experiences with, like customer service bots, if you're trying to rebook something online. Or if you shop on Amazon and you get recommendations that because you bought dish soap, you might also want a sponge. Those are AI engines, albeit at very low kind of primitive levels. Other things like on Netflix, if you liked this true crime documentary, you might also like that true crime documentary. Those recommendation engines are fueled by AI. Taking it a step further in things that quite literally save lives is in healthcare. Gene sequencing or genome editing for things like personalized medicine or vaccines or other therapies. Decades ago, it was incredibly expensive and very slow to sequence a genome. Today, those same things can be done at quite literally fractions of the cost and done in seconds. That has enabled tremendous innovations in healthcare. And as I mentioned, quite literally saved lives. Now, taking it a step further into something that's even more complex and real, especially to our portfolio, is Microsoft. Microsoft owns a company called GitHub, and that is coding for programmers. They not too long ago released something called GitHub Copilot. What is that? It's a set of tools that a programmer can use to prompt it for coding. So it might be, give me a login and password interface for a customer portal. Well, historically, programmers would have to start from scratch. Now they can query that database and it will give them secure, error-free code that enables them to do things faster and innovate faster. Think of this as the advent of formulas in Excel or the advent of spell check in Word or email. Think of how much faster we're able to do things, those of us that monkey around in Excel or those of us that write lots of emails and commentaries. Those type of unlocks in Office Suite products are now happening in GitHub Copilot for programmers and users of Microsoft data. And to put Microsoft applications, to put some numbers on it, already 1.3 million subscribers for GitHub, even though it's been out for just a handful of months. And they're paying $20 to $30 per month for this. Why would they pay that? So that they could unlock time, do more things, drive further innovations. And so those are just three things, one at the kind of lower end level that we're interacting with today in terms of recommendation engines, at the higher level in terms of saving lives, healthcare, and then the third being enabling programmers to do things faster, safer, and hopefully innovate more.
I have a personal experience with this too. We're trialing Copilot through our Microsoft suite, and I had the nemesis of all people that use Excel, which is a circular reference, and I couldn't sort it out. This is a couple of weeks ago, and I could just easily query Copilot embedded in Excel, which solved the problem for me and found what I needed to fix, and also gave me a better formula that I could use to not have this problem again. It was probably would have been an hour plus of researching on the internet, and took me maybe 5-10 minutes to sort out just through the help of Copilot. So saving time is definitely a big one. Let's talk about the investing side of this, Aylon. Chips and cloud are areas that investors have jumped all over. These were among the best performing stocks over the last year. Why are people so excited about this area as it relates to AI specifically?
Greater computing power is needed to fuel AI. You can think of chips and the cloud as being the fuel or the engine for the AI revolution. It reminds us back to when the internet first started, where there was lots of fiber that needed to be built so that we could have our homes connected. With the benefit of hindsight, that was, of course, obviously needed. And it was, of course, obvious that we overbuilt fiber. Now, not saying that we're overbuilding today, but that's the first order effect. In order to enable these AI models and large language models, which fuel AI applications, in order to do that, we need computing power. And it takes more and more computing power as these models get more and more complex. So if we wanted to do a ChatGPT query here on our desktop, if you will, depending on the query, it would take anywhere from 4 to 400 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the device itself would need to also have significant amounts of memory and compute power. Well, the benefit of the cloud is that we can put that infrastructure in a shared environment. And while many folks hear cloud and we think virtual, the reality is it's virtual to us here today, but it's physical someplace else, whether it be in Arizona or some other, or Northern Virginia, where a lot of data centers and server farms are. But the point being, the cloud has enabled us to share this infrastructure across lots of different users and be more efficient, as opposed to building fiber to every single home, regardless of the amount of internet consumption was happening in each home or area. So chips and cloud are that first piece, but large language models are another piece. And companies like OpenAI, which has a partnership with Microsoft, and companies like AWS and private companies like Anthropic and others are developing these large language models, which are used to train. They are trained and used in AI applications. What's interesting to us right now, and we don't have the answer to, but are these differentiated or not? Or are these perhaps similar to web browsers like Netscape or Mozilla or Internet Explorer that became things of the past largely and became a winner take most environment where there's not much of a revenue or cash flow potential in web browsers today? It's more about search. And that became a winner take most market. Perhaps these large language models are, analogous to that. We don't know. It's too early to tell on that, but those are some things that we're studying. And those are areas that have gotten lots of attention in chips and cloud, being those first order effects or perhaps more shinier objects that are growing at rapid rates right now as this demand really, really inflects.
You've referenced Nvidia a couple of times now. We haven't owned Nvidia in the portfolio. Tell us why.
At Aristotle, and for us to make an investment, we require three elements to be present. You can think of our process as a three-legged stool. Number one is it needs to be a quality business, which Nvidia most certainly is. And for a topic for another day is how we define quality. Number two is a company must be attractively valued. And the third is we must see catalysts or changes at the business that are going to take it from good to great or great to exceptional. While we have studied Nvidia for a number of years and admire its quality characteristics and even can see some catalysts, frankly, the valuation is difficult for us to get through. And even though the fundamentals continue to surprise, the valuation continues to be rather rich for us at, almost, depending on where the stock price is at any given day, about 60 times free cash flow, which for us is a bit rich. Doesn't mean it can't be a good investment, and it of course has been a good investment, but part of our approach at Aristotle is to study the entire value chain, not just individual companies. And by studying the value chain, we can sometimes find what we view as more optimal areas to invest in. And I know in the past we've talked about a picks and shovels approach, and instead of trying to bet on the horse, we'd rather sell the materials to the jockeys and sell the horseshoes to the horses, because we don't know that we'll be able to pick the winning horse, but we do know that the race will continue to occur. And so we found some other companies in the AI value chain, if you will, that are in fact in the portfolio.
So let's talk about that, because I've heard you use the term, first order, second order, third order effects of AI. First, let's talk about what that means, and then tell us what some of these companies are that have piqued the team's interest.
So first order effect would be the chips or the cloud providers. And I mentioned we do invest in, we have been invested in Microsoft. Second order effects might be things like GitHub or Adobe's Firefly, or as you mentioned, Solomon, the Copilot feature, the software that is enabling AI. Then there are things in terms of second order effect, like memory. So we talked about how much data is being consumed and how much memory is required. Well, a company that's in the portfolio is Samsung. It's been in the portfolio for several years, and many people think of Samsung as a consumer electronics company. And yes, they absolutely are. They have one of the strongest brands and do lots of things in consumer electronics. But the overwhelming profit driver is memory. Over 50% of their profits come from memory. And they produce both NAND and DRAM, which are different types of memory. And so that's an area where we talked about how ChatGPT queries or other generative AI queries are more and more data intensive and therefore memory intensive. And so Samsung being one of the leaders in memory, means that they stand to benefit on a second order effect of AI. To give you other numbers, if we get to fully autonomous vehicles, which would be perhaps a wonderful thing, comparing a fully autonomous vehicle's memory needs to an internal combustion engine vehicle is somewhere between 30 and 100 times more memory is needed. And whether we get to autonomous cars in the next 3 to 5 years, that's probably unlikely. But as anyone who has shopped for a vehicle in the past year or two, or is shopping now, they can relate to the fact that there's more digital components, there's more graphics, there's more memory, there's lots more technology and digitization and connectedness going into a car. And companies like Samsung stand to benefit, as do other businesses like Qualcomm, which is a chip manufacturer, mostly in handsets, but also increasingly in cars and others. So those are second order effects where companies in the portfolio are benefiting from AI. And a third order effect is something that's, we find pretty obvious, and sometimes the best investments are hiding right in front of us, and that's construction. Whether you're building a new home community, a new residential community, a strip mall, a movie theater, or one of the many data centers that are out there, we need gravel and rocks, or what's referred to as aggregates. And one of the nice things about aggregates, at least to an investor in the business, is that it costs more to ship it than it does to buy it, which means once you have an aggregate quarry in place, it's likely that you'll take strong market shares. And a business in the portfolio is Martin Marietta. They're a US-based company that has the number one or number two market share position in 90% plus of their markets, which means if you're building a data center in their market, you're likely to buy their rocks. And there are over 11,000 data centers out there in the globe, out there worldwide, lots of them in the US. And on average, they're about 100,000 square feet. They're also growing tremendously. There's lots of projects in the pipeline through fiscal stimulus and just general private economic activity that position Martin Marietta quite well to benefit from this construction boom that is tied to data centers. So that's one of the third order effects where good old fashioned rocks are benefiting quite well in terms of their business. And while a rocks business may not double overnight or in one quarter or 1 year, it's the type of steady Eddie type of business that can thrive in good markets and do quite well in tough markets that we tend to gravitate towards. And so Martin Marietta is one of those third order effects businesses.
We were talking about all the positive aspects of AI, but it's never all positive. What are some of the things that maybe isn't getting enough attention, or aspects that are maybe on the fringe but will become mainstream when we discuss AI perhaps in the future?
Power consumption is one that is perhaps on the negative side. A generative AI server has 10x the power consumption as a traditional server. And now that's great if it's green energy, but what if it's some other type of energy? And as we know, things around, fossil fuels and energy security are sensitive topics today. And so as we have these advancements, as we have more data centers, as we have more servers and lots of other things that come from generative AI applications, that means we also have a significant strain on the energy demand and energy scarcity. So a third order effect in the portfolio is a company like Cameco, which I know is quite well known in Canada. If we were to tell you that, base load power is cheap, abundant, and largely safe, most people would say that is a great solution to increase in demand for energy. Unfortunately, there's the negative connotation of that energy being called nuclear. It's not our idea, but we have heard from another market participant say, what if they just called it mineral energy instead of nuclear energy? Feels like that would do a lot better on the ballot here in California, and I imagine in several other areas. But jokes aside, power consumption is something to be aware of and to be mindful of as we see strains on energy grid and supply demand potential imbalances going forward. One other maybe more obvious or more talked about thing that we feel is perhaps not getting the proper attention is labor. So we didn't talk about factory automation or warehouse automation, but those are second and third order effects that stand to benefit from AI. Think of the meat packing plant that is an assembly line. You have this big piece of beef, and it would take a person with their hands and their muscle and their manpower to take that, or human power, take that through the line, and they'd be cutting it and doing it. And there'd be lots of safety issues, cleanliness issues, but by and large, it's a rather standard task. Well, companies like Fanuc in Japan are automating things in factories with robots and cobots. So it's helping that factory worker bring that big, several 100-pound piece of meat down the line, cut the fat, cut the trimmings, put it into different areas ready for packaging so that we can feed people. that is an area where sometimes we feel today that people are looking at generative AI and things that can be automated as a way to cut costs and reduce labor. And we think that, perhaps the market is focused incorrectly on that. Perhaps generative AI is more of that productivity unlock, like you mentioned before, using that copilot to be able to find the error in the spreadsheet that might have taken us hours. So we see it more as a potential complement to labor, which is an increasingly scarce resource today, rather than a replacement. Said differently, we fear that the market may be viewing, maybe taking AI as a way to cut costs as opposed to increase the value of labor and the necessity of human capital.
What's something that you personally get super excited about when it comes to AI, and something maybe on the negative side that worries you about this new technology?
So something that gets me excited is the things that the known unknowns, to take a government a government term that's used here that's maybe doesn't have the best connotation in terms of when it was used, but we know that there's lots of innovations that have yet to come from AI. We just don't know what they are. And so I mentioned things like personalized medicine and gene sequencing. Those are the types of things that maybe it can eradicate awful diseases like Alzheimer's or dementia or other things that we have spent quite literally as a society hundreds of billions of dollars trying to prevent, but still plague many people in this world. So those are the types of things that excite me in terms of benefits to society and also hopefully benefits to the portfolio. And then in terms of things that maybe scare me, that's a tougher one. It is, we've all seen movies and sci-fi stories of maybe that, the machine takes over man. And I just happened to see Oppenheimer recently. And so some of the aspects of, sometimes we unleash powers into the universe that are maybe stronger than we could have imagined. And like all innovations in life, there sometimes is, negative things that come with it. So cyber warfare and things of, high sensitivity getting into the wrong actors' hands is obviously a concern, and is something that, all governments, all economies, all people, hopefully, can be guided in a more positive way.
Well, thanks for that. And from my perspective, I agree. Just the interest in not knowing what new ways AI is going to improve our lives, is like healthcare specifically, is super exciting to read about and learn more about. And like any technology, I think you're right. Anything can fall into the hands of bad actors who misuse it. So ensuring we've got the structures in place to protect society from that is going to be important. Aylon, thank you for doing this. It's always helpful.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
And if you've liked this video, then please share it with someone else that might find it useful. And if you haven't already subscribed, then I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit the subscribe channel so that you can be informed when we publish new videos like this one today. Happy investing.